And as usually happens with these talks, there will be people dribbling in the door for a while on Island time. So while they're doing that, it's just kind of handy to know we don't have a script. We find out what folks want to talk about, what they want to learn about, and then we try to talk and work around that.
Yeah.
So what are you folks working on? What are you working on a book, or are you trying to self-publish?
I'm working on a book.
Yeah.
It's been on the back burner for a long time. I'm on the final draft, and I would like to publish it, and I'll probably be doing self-publishing. There's a good chance, so I want to know.
Yeah.
I want to learn about that process. I don't really know anything about it.
I really understand that. Yourself?
Well, I have a book in mind, and I know someone else who self-published, and so I just wanted to learn more about it. It's sort of a medical orientation book.
Yeah, okay. And if you don't want to answer, feel free to just, tell me to shut up and go to the next person.
I've actually written 3 books, and I like that, I think they're going to call it Moxie, where you send it out to publisher after publisher.
Oh, yeah.
So
No, I think it's called masochism.
that I'm
Free
also
pink slip wallpaper.
Yes.
always looking for an editor or a proofreader.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes people come to these things who are interested in doing that sort of thing.
Well, and if nothing else, one of the strongest things the Whidbey writing community is good for is networking and finding somebody who can do any aspect of the book that you want done. So we can always spread the word. Don, you want to see what you're?
Well, I was going to tell him the formatting is the challenge that I have found and discovered. And that doesn't seem to be your issue.
Defined format.
Formatting is putting the book together. If the page is the right size and copying the right size, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I write the book and then I'm done with it, and I want somebody else to proof it and do the grammar. It's not my strong point, but my themes are good.
I'm chuckling because he just corrected the grammar on one of my tweets. He's better at grammar than I am. Yourself? You, sir?
Oh, I write short stories, and I've ended up writing a longer one that I'm thinking about. It's got graphics and things like that. I want to.
So what's the genre? What's the genre?
I write mostly fairy tales.
Cool.
They're for old people.
All right.
They're silly little stories.
Yeah. And you?
I haven't actually written any books at this point, but I have lots of ideas in my mind, mostly of sort of a do-it-yourself genre, like arts, crafts, that kind of thing. So I think particularly because the books I envision involve a lot of visual things, I sort of have a curiosity about how that translates to, kind of self-publishing, because I feel like there's more involved than just printed words.
Yeah, we'll tell you.
Okay.
And you?
I have to get her eye contact though, because she's looking at her shoes right now.
We're just talking about what folks are working on. Do you want to pass that along?
Sure.
Or you're
Children's
welcome to skip. If
Yes.
Yeah, just children's stories.
Just children's stories? Just one of the most successful, profitable aspects of the publishing world? Just that. Okay.
Oh, I have 2 of those.
So with those introductions from yourself, do you want to introduce? You want to start the talk?
Oh. Well, my name is Don Scobie. This is Tom Trimbath. We're both here tonight to present self-publication from inspiration to publication. As we jokingly like to say, we're both from out of town. Tom's from Clinton, I'm from Coopville. So, I actually a little bit of backstory, and it rather ties in why I'm turning around and saying, "Oh, you're talking, DIY." I lead the DIY charge. So I actually the easy way of putting it is I half grew up in Seattle, I half grew up in Coopville. And then about 5-6 years ago, between economy and different things, I looked at it and I said, let's move full time to the island. And I actually live about 4 miles from here. Just moved up finally to Coopville with a house sale. Anyway, I moved here in part to start a small baking business. I'm not doing any shameless self-promotion, but it was a small baking business.
Start up there too.
Yeah.
As we can describe chutzpah.
Humility. Anyway, I came in part to do that, but I've also done a lot of writing. And one of the very first things I did, I spent a lot of time job searching. And when I moved here, I was just enough out of shape that when I walked the 4 miles into town, I had shin splints by the time I got here for Tom's presentation. And then I still had 4 miles to walk home in the dark, the very dark. Anyway, I've written a number of different books, and I had always understood that the way you publish is send out all those manuscripts to all those publishers, and then wait for all those pink slips, and then finally somebody accepts your book and says, "Great, we'll make your book and give you nothing, except a finished book." So I rather looked at it at the time and said, "Well, I'm making this baking business as a form of employment for myself. I'll work on those books once things are stabilized." So, it's things will be great in the future, whatever. So I see with coming to the library presentation by this Tom fella about self-publishing, and I'd known that was also an option, and I thought maybe I should find out more about that. So ended up doing baking business for about 2 years and found that there's a lot of work to do in baking, not a lot of money to make in baking. So I'm right now pivoting my business to being about cooking, about food, about people connecting over food, good stuff that way. And applying the things that I got from Tom 5-6 years ago. And I actually started on this book about almost 3 years ago. 3 years ago next month. Yeah. Which I can tell you as part of that story toward publishing a book and having things go along smoothly. 2 things that I learned the hard way, and I mean this for you to laugh with me. If you're going to write a book, don't get whiplash, because it makes doing this hard. That slowed down the book. When I was just about done with the book, the other thing I learned was back up your hard drive.
Oh, man. Oh.
Yeah. So I was able to restart here about 2 years ago with a backup that was at that point a month old. And at that, I saved all my recipes. It's DIY. But all my recipes were there, but basically all of my development work and enough of my photos were gone. So if you're working on something for more than 10 hours, back it up. Thumb drives are cheap, whatever it's going to be.
You can imagine the first conversation we had when he was saying, "I thought I was going to publish by Thanksgiving." And ... And what's your goal right now for the book?
Right now, it's close enough that
Would you like to get published by Thanksgiving?
I'd like to get published by Thanksgiving. Actually, it's possible it could be done by the end of this weekend. It's possible it could be next week, following week. It's terribly close. So I can smell the finish line at this point.
But when you mentioned the comment about graphics earlier, graphics are fascinating, that you can do the sorts of things you can do now that you couldn't do 20 years ago. But folks who are trying to write novels and self-published novels have the easiest time if what you've got is one book that, in the style of some authors, there's no chapters, there's just, an awfully long thing with some breaks in between the paragraphs. Those folks can just breeze through the process. If you're doing a cookbook like he's doing, it's taking on one of the greater challenges going. Children's books are actually easier, because children's books, you're usually not collecting a bunch of images to make a page. You're usually having an image and then you have a bunch of text over it. So you've created those pages. So he's actually, for his first book, trying one of the most difficult things you can do.
Typical me. So this is just a template here. I decided to work from a template because I realized 2 things. Was that I was doing technical writing, and when I was doing a dozen different biscotti recipes, when you get down to it, the directions are the same. So I'm not going to rewrite that or retype that every time. So what I laid out for myself was title format and then just a little punch phrase or punch line, tagline. That's what I'm looking for. And then sometimes if I have a story about my recipes, I plug that into here and keep it short. And if I had a photo and ingredients, and then what's actually on the next page, which I just did this one to show the picture, gets into the directions. And then I also do things, my tips and thoughts, which are this biscotti dunks well with coffee and eggnog, or whatever it is.
So if we can continue with the intros, then we'll get back and leave that up because it's a great example. I've been self-publishing since 2002. So when I started watching the self-publishing industry, it was remarkably young, to the point that was back in the danger days where you were considered to be a vanity author and nobody who published considered you published because you were just satisfying your own ego. But to give you an idea, here's the first one that I did, which is Just Keep Pedaling. What happened was I bicycled across the United States. I wasn't trying to write a book. I didn't have a cause. I was just trying to take some time off. But when I got done, I had 15,000 words in emails. And somebody said, that's more notes than most folks have when they start a book. So they talked me into writing the book, and I did. And it's still my bestseller. But take a look at that. For one thing, it's paperback. And you look at that graphic, and this is from 2002, right? That's what I could get as a graphic in 2002. There's a bunch of lines. Now, as somebody else pointed out, there's no suspense. We know you survived. The line goes to corner. You didn't die midway.
There's no little explosion mark there.
Yeah, really. Okay, but then take it up about 10 years. And here what we've got is hardback, full color photo on the inside, on the outside, high quality paper on the inside, art quality photos on the inside. So outside and inside, the technology has dramatically improved in both cases. Now, the prices are different. We can get into those sorts of things. You've got it.
I'm going with the big picture.
There you go. And then you've got the intermediary, which is the way a lot of folks are publishing now. This is out of CreateSpace, which is now Kindle, which is owned by Amazon, but it's paperback. The cover can do full color art, that kind of thing. And the concession is that, as he was nice enough to find and I was nice enough to lose, the inside graphics are black and white. Now, you can do whatever level of color and paper you want. You can also go as cheap as you want. You can find publishers that'll do cheap paper with cheap backing and whatnot. But that's what I've had a chance to see. So far, I have written 6 books, one across writing across the United States, 3 about hiking up in the Cascades, one about walking across Scotland, which sells because of the title. It has walking, thinking, drinking across Scotland. And I swear people buy it just because it says drinking in Scotland. And I had the unfortunate circumstance of writing one on personal finance as the market crashed 10 years ago. Oops. And then I've also published 5 of these photo essays of Whidbey Island. So I've had a chance to see a broad reach of the publishing options and how it's progressed. And one thing I found is that it's hard for anyone to be an expert in this field, because every time I do this talk, I've been giving these talks for over 10 years now, every time I do it, something has changed. For folks who are familiar with it at all, they may recognize that CreateSpace, which has been one of the most popular ways to self-publish recently, just became part of Kindle. And all the folks that had books on their CreateSpace are now getting these surprising messages saying you're not working for Kindle. Okay, last time I did this talk, last time I did this, CreateSpace and Kindle were 2 different machines, 2 different companies. Next time we give this talk, it'll be something else.
It's just changed in the past week or so.
Yeah, and that what we say is different than what somebody else says. It's quite possible just because we've had different experiences. It's also because the technology is changing so fast. This is an immature industry. But before handing it back to Don, I'll point out one thing, which was when this book came out in 2002, there were about, it was under 100,000. I think it was actually under 35,000 books published this way. This is off what's called a print-on-demand press. It's basically nothing more than a really big, high-speed inkjet printer. Beside another high-speed inkjet printer, they do the inside, they do the outside, they glue it, you're done. Last year, 750,000 titles were done this way. That is 3 times more than what the traditional publishing industry is doing. Traditional publishing industry is usually done about 250,000. This technology is now so popular, there's 3 times as many coming out that way. You can imagine that it's gone from being something that was looked down upon to something that is now seen as a alternative to that traditional query letter, to that traditional way of trying to get in the agent's door, get in the publisher's door. Because if you do this, they don't have to guess if you're going to finish the book. They don't have to guess how you're going to market it. They don't have to guess what you're like to work with. They can get a feel for that because you're out there in public already. So, with those kind of an intro, and by the way, if you all want to interject, please, because otherwise we're just going to keep talking about what we think is interesting, and it may not be what you think is interesting.
I want to say one thing.
Sure.
Last time I've actually speak before.
If I duplicate myself, I'll be amazed.
And that is, there is no longer you no longer publish 100 books and stick them in your garage waiting for people to buy them. Somebody orders them online. There are 2 printers at the time. One does pages and one. Am I correct on that?
Oh no, you're good. You're a great leader. I like you. Welcome back.
And,
Should I give him my shirt?
Yeah.
Sit down.
Because I know people that have boxes
Oh yeah.
of books that they self-published, and I don't know. Every time you move them, I guess they're going to move them with them. But, so that's.
Or you let the mice get at them. It used to be 20 years ago. If you wanted to self-publish, you had to commit. You didn't have to, but the standard was you committed to buying 2,000 to 3,000 copies of your book. It was probably going to cost you $5 per book, so you're looking at $10,000 to $15,000 that you have to sell those books then to get back to break even. And if they don't sell, you've got an awful lot of books sitting there somewhere. The reason I walked over here is because, like I said, Just Keep Peddling is my most popular book. It's my worst writing, but it's my best selling book. So sorry for those who think that really good writing is what makes really good sales. That's another story. But I ran out of copies of it. So just because of tonight, I went out to, didn't even go to my publisher. It was harder to buy from my publisher than to just go to Amazon and order 10 copies. So these are the only ones I have, besides my own personal one that I signed for myself when I got the first one in the mail. So you only have to put out as much as you want. At this point, this book that he just pointed out, this would cost me $35 to publish. And all I had to do was not even buy one. So all of a sudden you've gone from looking at having to spend $15,000 to $20,000, $10,000 to $15,000 to doing it for free. And if you're doing it for ebooks, well, of course, you're not going to get cheaper if it's free. I spent $35 just to get this into the distribution network, but we can get into that later. So it has dramatically changed. And I do have a couple cases of books at my house where I had greater enthusiasm for the books than anybody else did.
You don't have to answer this now, but maybe at some point you could explain, because you just said you have a publisher, okay, but you published that book. It's self-published, but you also have a publisher, and I just wanted to understand that.
The technology is changing enough that the industry is changing enough that some of the definitions no longer as concrete as they used to be.
So what does the publisher do for you?
So really, there's a printer.
Okay.
And they call themselves publishers, and in my regard, they really do an awful lot of the publishing.
Yeah.
But as I just encountered with one of them, they will not take that title. They will make sure that they consider themselves the printer, and I'm the publisher for legal reasons because of who has what authority and who has what responsibilities. So it's commonly said that CreateSpace is a publisher, Lulu.com as a publisher and that kind of thing, but they're really the printer.
Okay.
By the way, the cost of this one was 35. As much as I wasn't spending 10 or 15,000, the cost for this one was 1,000. What happened was, along the way, Amazon realized there's folks out there charging $1,000 to publish a book. Great. If we just do it for free, we're going to have somebody who wants to buy books off of us and is going to sell books through us. Why charge them for that? And all of a sudden, the price goes out of the market, and that's one of the reasons that it's going through the changes it is now.
Now, I may be jumping ahead, but are any of your books available digitally,
Yes.
and how does that work? Or do you want can you?
This one, the ebook sells 5 times better than the paperback. And the profit on the ebooks is higher. The profit, by the way, the royalties on this one, once I did through this was iUniverse. My royalties were 10 to 20%, better than the industry standard of 3 to 5 for traditional publishing. But with this one, my royalties are more on the 30 to 70%, depending on what price I pick. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like, really? 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 And yet, I make more money off the ebook than I do off the paperback.
I actually asked Tom at one point how he does on sales for those and where else he gets his books placed and that sort of thing. And he more or less gave me the response of, I don't really worry about the paper sales. What I watch, what I count is the ebook sales. Oh.
And if I could just follow up with her question, and that is, you have got 10 copies of your book. Why?
In case there were 10 people that showed up that wanted to buy them.
Okay, well, that's,
And I would rather, but you notice I only bought 10. I did buy 100.
and do you go to distributors, or do you ever go to bookstores?
Oh yeah, I'll do that kind of thing. And let's get into that when we get past some of the basis of what he's been doing recently, because the experiences that I have aren't nearly as fresh as what he is in the midst of, because he is in the midst of templates, finding the right photos, getting them in the right format, getting the right permissions, going through, getting editorial comments, having folks test various things, the whole bit.
Still figuring out the title.
Oh, yeah, there is that, yes.
Yeah.
And by the way, if there's something we don't get to or you don't want to ask in public, wait until afterwards. And Lord knows, getting us to talk is not hard. So, you want to jump in?
On which?
Well, where you are with the book and what it's like to be in the midst of the process today.
Well, for me, I've been on and off with my book, between moving house, different things that have just ended up taking priority. So I've had to shift things around. Sometimes too, I've gotten myself distracted by getting other book projects going. I counted lately, and I think I have 8 book projects, including ebooks, 8 book projects that are half done. So when this one's done, I can roll right into those. 8 of those and 4 CDs, which you can also do audio. And you can even do audio. You can do CD and book packages with CreateSpace.
Not Kindle.
Now Kindle, yeah. Which, as a musician, I've done. I have 2 CDs over there. I have done that same sort of thing where you have to order 500. And even now, I have hundreds of CDs sitting in my closet. Those don't sell unless I go out somewhere and do something. And I know actually, basically, both of these discs are $2 for my cost delivered. This is actually $2.03. Why I know that, I don't know. But I don't sell any of those because my band we're spread apart, we don't play. But I plan on starting to do my CDs through Amazon, which they actually charge, I think, about $3 or $3+ per unit. But to me, where that also makes sense is Amazon's working 24 hours a day, and my band hasn't played since St. Patrick's Day. So if you have your CD up or your book, you have your, it's still calling them meta tags with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have tagging with your book too that helps people search and ultimately find your book. your CD, your Kindle book. And then they're selling 24 hours a day, every time zone. They don't take off for holidays. So to me, some of these things make sense too, to get that better exposure. Where I've heard even other musicians turn around and say, I don't like selling my CDs through Amazon because first I have to pay for my CDs, then I deliver them to Amazon, and then they take this cut for a CD that they didn't even make. And I look at it and say, yeah, but you didn't have to get in a cramped van and go up and down the coast. So some of that, to that end, what I'm trying to actually get at, and is also around your DIY, is that one of the differences too between traditional publisher and self-publishing is you're the person that needs to market your book. You're the person that needs to push your book. And one of the great things between print on demand, whether it's books, discs, whatever, is there isn't that stock. You don't have to hold that stock. The power is back in your hands to create these things. It's not the publisher, it's not the record label that's turning around and saying, yes, no, we will or won't do this, because they have to sink a certain amount of their money and a certain amount of their work into marketing for you. In this case, you can make a website, you can make a Facebook page, you can go out and engage your audience and say, hey, I've written a book on, children's book, I've written a medical book, whatever. It's up to you to do that, but it's also a lot easier because you can stay home.
So if I may then, so to me, the key difference, the thing I really enjoy, my passion is people and ideas. I'm a consultant. I do a bunch of other things as well because I'm a writer. I'm not making money. I'm doing other things. One of the things I love about this process is the old process with any of this stuff was the artist, the writer, whoever had to create something. Then they had to convince like an agent to accept it, and then maybe a publisher to take it, and then somebody who's going to distribute it to a store that's going to sell it. So they're going to finally give it to somebody who's going to consume it, some reader or listener or something like that. But you had to create your product with all these other intermediaries in mind. So if you're trying to get voice into your work, if you're trying to get you into your work, it's getting filtered by all these people. So at this point, the thing that some folks ding this whole self-publishing thing for is that you don't have those intermediaries. And there are mistakes that show up as a result. It's hard to do anything that's perfect. But your voice becomes much clearer. There are fewer folks saying no. You don't have to worry about trying to get 5 yeses lined up to get to you, between you and the person you're trying to communicate with. It's you and that person. As long as you're not doing something that gets in the way of the law, because there is one intermediary still, and they will, usually make sure that you're not trying to blow something up. They're still going to check for that sort of thing. But it is much more direct. The problem is, the fundamental problem, especially with writers, is that writing is an introvert's life. You get to live inside your book, you get to live inside your imagination, you get to live inside the laptop. Being an author is selling it, and that's extroverted, and it's really hard to do both. You can hope that it's just going to sell on its own, in which case you're golden, but it's not easy to do at all.
Where's that magic wand?
I don't know. Where's the Harry Potter section?
Well, one of the ones that's been put to me, actually more from music, but it applies everywhere. This is a talk in and of itself, is one of the greatest failings of artists is not in their art, but in their unwillingness to become business people. And that's blunt, but it's exactly what it is. So my own approach with my book is I had an editor who was also trying to cut her teeth getting into the editing business, and she worked volunteer for credit for me. I ended up giving her my manuscript, and she came back. One of the first things she came back and said was, most of your grammar is pretty straight. Your spelling, you left clicked, because that's hard. Most of your book is pretty well ready to go. And I said, well, yeah, it has to be, because I'm DIY, I'm small business. I don't have money for an editor. I don't have money for these different things. I have to do that. So whether it's getting those things together, or even just leading up the charge for what your art cover is going to be, that. I'm not a graphic artist guy. This is obviously not my book, but this is not my strong area. It's the thing that I still need to find something else to do. But being a small business person, I still have to lead that element. So it does still all come together. So as well, then you have to look at it and say, okay, what does it take to sell my book? Is it doing that webpage? Is it going out and even just putting flyers around for when you're doing a book presentation? So yeah, when I got my book to Linda, most of it was ready because I'm used to not having, let's see. So for Whidbey Island Baking Company, the grand total of employees was myself and my parents. You know, I don't have somebody to wash the pots and pans, you know, that sort of thing. So I take that same approach to the writing. So,
And the other thing, there's always another thing. So one other aspect of this, though, is I consider that a writer is writing their own lottery ticket. The success rate is incredibly low, but the payoff is there. There are folks that do succeed at this. There are folks that go off and make a living based on writing, and this may be the avenue to get there. That's an avenue that had all those gatekeepers before, and those gatekeepers are gone. And I think that's one reason why there's 750,000 titles. I'm not saying there's 750 great, some great titles. Matter of fact, there may only be 750 great titles, but I'm glad to see that people get a chance to try. A friend of mine up in Coopville, some of you may know her. She wrote a book called let's see if I get this right, The Last Supper Catering Company. Self-published, a little bit of an introvert, but she solved it by spending a half a day every other day on Twitter. She had to use Facebook because you're supposed to, but she really did everything just a half a day every other day on Twitter. And she won numerous awards because she did have good writing and it was good story. She had the right cover. She had the right title. She didn't plan it, but it happened and it worked. A beautiful package. And the most frustrating thing for me looking at her stuff is that she decided not to make a second one. It's all set up for a sequel and she's not doing it because it was like, well, I guess I did that and that's okay. What I'd like to do is talk about the various elements of the book. Oh, yep.
You had mentioned an editor.
Mm-hmm.
And what does the editor do for you?
Well, in the case of the lady that I worked with, she actually contacted me through my Facebook page. And she had, I think she did like dual major or was an understudy or something like this. So she actually had the credentials. It's just she was trying to leave her own day job. And she originally offered to proofread my book. And with how we worked, she ended up editing. So what that actually comes to is she was looking for grammar issues, spelling issues. She was reading through and just seeing if what I wrote made sense. She cooks herself quite a bit, so she was also able to, she was the right fit for looking at my recipes to make sure that I have all the ingredients. I added all the ingredients through the directions, that sort of thing.
There's an interesting take on that question that you just had, which is I sat down one day over here at the Commons coffee shop with 3 editors. And I said, okay, I've heard of copy edit, line edit, content edit, and I've heard just general edit. What are they? And they didn't have a consistent series of definitions. What they did come up with is they say, understand what it is you want and interview the people to see if they can do that for you. Because one of their great frustrations is a writer having an expectation, an unspoken expectation, that they inevitably conflict with, where they're providing one thing and they're expected to deliver something else. So I say, find out what you want and then go find somebody who can provide it. Some of these folks in particular, I know, once they find out if they're doing one type of editing and what you're asking them for is something else, they'll be happy to go, no, go talk to, the other person, because everyone finds their niches. And I just, between the two of us, if you need to check grammar, talk to him. If you need to see if it has, well, if you need somebody with experience in that stuff, ask him. I consider myself to be a serviceable writer, a serviceable editor, a serviceable author. Where I put it is, there are people that will take a piece of wood and just turn it into beautiful sculpture. And I have a tendency to write like I've got 2 2x4s, a hammer, and a nail. which can be, sounds like demeaning, but at the very same time, that's sometimes exactly what you need. You need somebody who can do something, get it done now. We'll find out as your book has been out and selling.
Yeah. Also on editors, one that I ended up finding out in the process too is you may also want to ask for referrals from editors, because as I found out, there are editors that they're just playing the game for your money. Basically, oh sure, I'll edit your book. They may actually read through, they may mark 5 things and say looks good,
yep, and
send it back, and they really didn't edit your book. Also, one that I ran into that was self-published, I edited because it bugged me so much. I read through the book almost entirely, and then I said, okay, this is bugging me too much. I went back to the beginning with a pencil. And this thing, it just looks like it's been slaughtered because it was terrible. And I think what happened is this person did the editing route of, hey, you're literate, edit my book, you're my friend, right? Well, does the friend understand what you need from that? Right. And this particular book, I think it was just read by the friend and you know, hey, I just need you to read through and find out if there's any mistakes. And the person read through and said, okay, looks good. Well, that person at that point, the author had to say, okay, must be good. You know, or I don't need an editor, which is also a mistake. Have somebody read through, but there are editors that will just take your money and give very few reflections.
I had a question with regard to that. Which is that, would you ever consider having a contract with an editor, like sort of an agreement of like,
That's pretty
this
normal.
is what, so that's, you would have a contract.
Yeah, I mean, in
I
my
mean,
case,
I know
with
somebody
Linda, I
writer-
had a handshake, but you know, I
Yeah.
felt I actually got to meet her. She's actually in Minnesota or something, which I went to Minnesota to play my friend's wedding here just a little over a year ago. And she ended up coming around saying, hey, I'm going to be on vacation near to Hastings. Let's meet. So we were supposed to meet for, I think, 30 or 60 minutes. And about 3 hours later, after, you know, laughing, talking, BSing, and finally getting down to it, I just had a really good feeling and just said, give me your thumb drive. And before I got home, she'd already done a read through. So I did that one on a handshake, and I knew the risk I was taking. But yeah, contracts are actually quite normal.
Especially if you don't know the person. Now, for instance, when I found editors, it's been on the island. But then again, I've been part of the writing community here since I got here. So I'm familiar with what Holly Thomas is going to do, what Ann Amberg might do, what Susan Jensen's going to do. You know, there's a number of folks, and I have a feel for what their styles are. So I'm not going to ask for contracts for them because, you know, we know each other.
Everybody knows where everybody
This is true.
If you're a member of any of the writers groups, good. That's usually the best place to start asking. If you're not a member of one of the writers groups, get to be a member of one of the writers groups there. And if you're enough of an introvert that you don't want to do that, we have a Facebook page, a Facebook group called Whidbey Authors. And the other place that a lot of the writers will show up is Island Bohemians. Whidbey Authors is just something I did one day that just took off. I created it and I just watched it run away from me. And you just say, oh, I have a good time.
so
Whereas
seeing on Facebook at this point, if there's a crossroad on Whidbey Island, there's a writers group named after it.
that's true.
So,
And Whidbey and the Island Bohemians is actually, I think, a product of the Whidbey Island Arts Council. So, and that's been drawing an awful lot of attention. Before we get much further in, though, I'd like to actually talk about the various parts of the book, if that's okay by you.
yeah, I have that list too.
And I figured that was a good page to start with.
Okay.
So if I may, as much as it's interesting just to think about, you know, it being a book, you write a bunch of words and you publish it. This is a great example of what you have to deal with is it's the text. Got to get the text right. Got to get the words right, the editing right. But it's also the formatting. You know, this is all, you know, capitalized. That's italicized. There's an extra line. This is a serif font. You might want to sans serif font. And then there's graphics. And then he's gotten fancy with putting the border around. Each of those things is a different skill. And some folks have all those skills on their own. But That's just to get a page done. Then there's also the copyright page, the title page, acknowledgments page, bio page, all those sorts of things. Because when you open up the book, the first thing you see is not chapter 1. It's 5 or 6 pages in. To publish the book, and I just want to get it in the general if you want to get into the specifics after this, but I always say you have to get everything into one file. And when I say everything into one file, it's not just all the words in one file. It's not all the graphics in one file. It's the words and the graphics and all this kind of blocking or not in one file. And that includes the bane of existence for those who use Microsoft Word. And having said that, I have gotten people who used to work on Microsoft Word really upset with me because of page numbering. They think it's marvelous. I'm glad that they're really proud of what they've done.
Intuitive.
Without a doubt, every time I've talked to somebody, not every time, I take it back, there's about a quarter of the folks that just figure it is intuitive and they do it right and they do it well. But getting the page numbers right so that page number 1 is not the first page you see, page number 1 is the first page of the first chapter, and that there's nothing before that or there's Roman numerals before that. I watched people spend hours. He and I spent an hour and a half with his book before the hard drive ate it. But it took the two of us an hour and a half to get his page numbering right.
Took less time to get the trim size.
So it's usually a Word, a Microsoft Word that's that typical.
And then you can also end up with where you think you finally get it nailed down. And I mean, the table of contents has got all the right page numbers in it and things like that. And then when I got to the print copy, it was outside the margin.
No page numbers.
There's no page numbers.
Actually, I solved my my page number issue overnight.
You were talking about fiber.
Yeah.
So let me do the other thing and we'll get back to that.
Okay.
So the other file then you have to do is the cover. So there's all this is going on. But then you have one other file you have to create. And that other file is not just the cover. It's the cover, the back, and the spine as a file that looks like that. And it's so natural to want to put the front cover here and the back cover here. But it's flip-flop because this is what's going to come out of the machine. What's going to come out of the machine is all these pages in the middle. The other machine's going to come out with that page on the outside. And then someone's going to pick up the inside, pick up the outside, put the outside into a machine, glue goes down, pages go down, pages come up, and then the book is created. So I say you really only have to have 2 files. You have to have the inside and the outside. But he's in the midst of creating the inside right now.
It's almost done.
You wanted to talk about that part?
Well, at this point, I pretty much just have some pictures to lay in. I talked with a local photographer, and I have, in addition to cookies, I have local wildlife pictures because I realized that I had about 3 sales demographics between people that actually buy recipe books to make stuff, people that buy recipe books just to read them, which sounds strange to me, but I do want to read the Thug Life cookbook if you know about that one. And then also since I'm this, there's people that will, with getting my book placed in different stores on the island, they'll buy it because they're tourists. They want this, they want a keepsake. So I figured to put in the nature photos too. And originally I wanted to put in Whidbey Island trivia at the bottom of every page, just to hit each of those sales markets or demographics and try and do it in a way that was not too confusing. As for page numbers that I mentioned a second ago, you and I spent an hour and a half a year or two ago. I've spent parts of the last 2 or 3 days trying to get that to work between 2003 and 2007, which are the only editions of Word that I have. And another fellow that I talked to online, I've been following different authors that are self-publishing more than anything to watch how they're marketing, but also to ask them different questions. And this one fellow had this, it's a sci-fi book, and he's got this beautiful cover. And I had to ask him because I know that with CDs, if I go to somebody to get my artwork made and I need to pay him, that it's $1,000 to do all of the artwork, the disc and everything. And again, I don't have $1,000. So I'm looking at this cover of this book, God, man, oh man, how much did you pay for the graphic art on this? He said, $35. I said, how? He says, Fiverr. It basically was getting people in the Philippines to make graphic art for the cover of his book for $5, and said the first 6 of them didn't turn out right.
So they were 30 to 35.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it going 35 only. Take my money, you know.
So that's FIVERR.com.
FIVERR. Right,
And you
and
give them $5 and they'll.
yeah, and last night it was last night at about midnight. I searched Microsoft Word because I was just pulling my hair out trying to get the page numbers to work. I could get the page 1 to numerals from page 4 through 10 or whatever it is. So I just looked up on Fiverr figuring, hey, I can find somebody, because I know this is actually pretty easy, particularly for people that are really imbued with Word. So just find somebody and see if they'll do it. And I ended up finding a guy that's in Pakistan, and I left him a message last night, and then I checked today around noon and he was still awake, and got it done in 5 minutes. If that, well, I think our whole conversation was about 5 minutes. And at this point, he hasn't, I sent him a message back because I sent him a file and I said, I'm sure this is very easy. And what I did too, is I only sent him about 30 pages. So I had my very first page on the title page, going through the table of contents and introduction, and then through the first recipe, because I didn't want to give somebody, except my editor apparently, I didn't want to just give over my whole book, but I knew if I gave those 30 pages that I could paste in the other 200 some odd pages of my book and get the numbering to work right for where I needed it to be 1, 2, 3, that sort of thing. And this guy ended up doing the work, and I said, hey, what's the damage? What do I owe you? And the guy logged off. But it said local time. It was almost 11 p.m. So I just figure I'll message him tomorrow and say, hey, I still owe you some money. What do I owe you? If he says $5, I'm going to send him 10. Done.
Mhm.
I don't need to be dealing with this close to being ready to upload to Amazon.
And Fiverr isn't always somewhere else. It sometimes is somebody in Freeland.
Or
You
that.
know? Because you find somebody that, if they know that they can spend 5 minutes making $5, how many of those can they do in a day? And if that's enough to get by on, they'll do that.
I used to do
TaskRabbit, Mechanical Turk.
I used to do 10-minute live videos with my Scottish small pipes for $5.
By the way, he's a bagpiper as well, if you hadn't already figured out. So
Well, what was it? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What was the challenge for you to do the numbering if he did it for $5? I mean, what's the difference between the two?
One difference right now is I'm dealing with a little bit of insomnia, so I'm not giving it the full 84%. But I couldn't get it figured out. I was looking at tutorials online, and I even came up with one tutorial that said, much like what Tom just said, it started out by saying, Microsoft likes to think that this is easy, but they don't make it easy. And I just couldn't get it figured out again.
I mean, I've at one time this year, because I help people publish their books. One time this year, I had 5 different authors I was working with, publishing their books, and none of those page numbering experiences were good, except for the one where we paid somebody to format the book, not to edit it. Well, they paid someone to edit it too, but we paid somebody to format the book. Now, granted, I think
Yeah,
she
there's two.
charged like $2,600. It's a really nice looking book. and there are folks that will, well, this is kind of a segue, but you have to realize, why are you publishing the book? Are you publishing the book to get a message out there? Are you publishing the book to prove that you can do it? Are you trying to make some money? Are you trying to make a bestseller? What are you trying to do?
Are you passionate about the topic?
At one time I was working with one person who's publishing a book a month. They're writing and publishing a book a month because there's a lot of short messages they want to get out there. They're not spending as much as this other person. This other person said, I want something that if it succeeds, it can immediately walk onto the New York Times bestseller list and look like it belongs there. And I believe that person spent on the order of $8,000 by hiring an editor, a formatter, a publicist, all these various pieces. It gets into that business decision. One of the most critical things I have found in all this, besides all these details and where the industry is understand your own goals. Why are you doing it?
Once you understand your own goals, that tells you a lot about who you want to have publish it, how you want to present it, how much money you want to put into it, how likely you are to do something else with it. It is, to me, it's the key behind everything else that you do with getting that book out there. So it's a bit of a digression, but of course, to me, it's the key thing. So maybe that isn't a digression after all.
Did the money pay off for this person that spent so much hoping to get it on the New York Times
Remember
bestseller?
that introvert extrovert thing I was telling you about? He had an extrovert lined up. The extrovert happened to be a member of the family. The extrovert happened to get a really good job offer in Africa. And all of a sudden, his publicity campaign went to, and he doesn't like going to bookstores, and he doesn't like going to public events at libraries. He's an excellent writer, beautiful storyteller, in-depth knowledge of his field. It's novels, but it's historical fiction, and he understands the history in the original Greek. And he can't get himself out there even to go on Facebook or Twitter or anything about the thing. So it's just sitting there.
But I'm wondering, like, the file that you send, you're saying you're getting ready to upload this file.
Mhm, mhm.
Is it a PDF?
With good
Sorry.
question.
You know, you're
You okay,
talking about
Tom?
Microsoft Word, but
Uh-huh.
so you have to create all the formatting somehow, either by doing it yourself or finding somebody else.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
you know, I'm imagining you can use lots of different
If I may.
programs to do that.
Oh, this one I can answer.
You answer that. I'll see if I can add to it.
So I actually, to give a little backup, I'm looking at Amazon as being the company that I'm going to publish through, just because it seems like they're pretty stable and they're huge. So it's kind of stick with the winner sort of thing. With Amazon, I got an author profile here about a year or so ago. And if you're considering going through Amazon, I would tell you get your profile as soon as you can, because they have a lot of free tools, free electronic online tools for making, whether it's your graphic art or formatting your book, that sort of thing. So here, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, I was talking with Tom, because I still had my book as being an 8.5 by 11 with normal margins, but I'm looking to do a 6x9 trim size, right? So Tom's saying, well, you need to get the template.
It's about that big.
You need to get the template off Amazon. You need to get the template. So I'm going to create space, and I'm looking and looking and looking and can't find anything. He says, well, start making a book, and then they'll give you the template. Kind of backwards. But once you tell them the trim size that you're looking for, and if I'm not mistaken, where the term trim comes from is in the old days, they'd make the book and then cut it.
Oh, yeah.
So it
So
has
the trim size is the actual
where,
physical size.
yeah, so I'm looking at a 6x9. Basically, Amazon, they said that they will accept your book, if I remember right, as a Word document, as a PDF, and I think something else, but I don't remember right now. To me, I'd just go ahead and load it as a Word. Why say
Okay,
that
and
it's
so then they
PDF?
just print it however it looks. So if it's like offset or not formatted correctly,
There's a few steps before that, actually. So you upload it, and then they have, they'll take about as much as 3 days.
They upload the interior, and they take 24 hours to make sure you haven't done something illegal.
Right.
Mhm.
So basically they check this over, and then they send you a PDF. I haven't seen this yet, but I understand this, and I'll be seeing it soon. They'll send you a PDF, and you can check and make sure, is this page on this side and not on that side? Does it have the page numbers? Is the picture actually in there? That sort of thing. If you're not on a timeline, if you haven't set a timeline, if you don't have a deadline, right now I do, because there's a little segue here. There's three best times for Christmas sales, and it's a good time for launching your book too. It's beginning of September. That one's done again. I keep on saying my book will be published before Christmas. I don't know what year, but September, Black Friday, and then right after Christmas, day after Christmas for ebooks, because people have gift card or book books because people have gift cards.
Yeah, this is the time of year they're buying the things they're going to put a ribbon on, but then they get the gift card at Christmas Day, and they don't want to go shopping. So they go online
Yeah.
and they buy ebooks.
They're still in the bathrobe and
Yeah.
drinking eggnog and gingerbread. And
So if I may,
Yeah.
the reason I chuckled when you said which file format, it has changed so many times in the last 16 years that I've been doing this, and can be as broad as he just said. Sometimes they'll accept multiple formats. And yes, if there's a mistake, the mistake's there. You got to catch it.
Yeah.
One file format that I put up looked okay when I had it. It was the one on personal finance, so there were graphs on the inside, black lines on a white background. Except when we got up there, it was a black background with white lines.
Oh.
Yeah. Not only does it not look good, that can actually curl the page because there's so much ink on one part of the page that when it dries and shrinks, the page can distort. And then the antithesis of it is a publisher that I know that won't just take a PDF. They won't just take a PDF dash, I think it was X. It was a PDF dash XF104 file format. I had to go find somebody who even knew what that was. So some of them are very broad in what they'll accept, and some of them are very narrow. And CreateSpace in one has gone through a number of formats in the time that I've been using them and helping other folks use them. So when in doubt, have a .doc, and you can make a PDF from that .doc.
Yeah.
And the .doc is always easier to format. It's always easier to edit, but the PDF is more stable. So when you've got the PDF, it's less likely to change in the transit. Whereas the .doc, if you're coming off of my Mac, it's like you say a 2003 version of Word. They're not working 2003, whereas a PDF is gonna.
okay, so I'll do that.
I have a question about formatting when it comes to print versus ebooks.
Yeah.
Like for example, I'll read an ebook on my phone,
Yeah.
right? So it looks
Yeah.
very different
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
a printed book. So I wondered how the format works. Is that something that, Amazon, as the person that's delivering that to somebody, are they sort of formatting it in that way, or is that something that you're considering?
No, you have one of the key questions, especially for things that have formatting as specific as his cookbook,
and for changes with
And-
CreateSpace and Kindle right now.
and also for poetry books, where they're very specific with the way the page is going to lay out. When you do a print book, this is going to be a boundary, this is going to be the layout, but if this is an ebook, you don't know where things are going to go. Unless what you do is you define this as an image, not a bunch of text, but as an image, and then the image gets shrunk down to the size of a smartphone or as big as whatever monitor you've got. You have to give up the control when you go to publish it as an ebook. But then you also open that avenue for folks that there are people that aren't going to want to do a cookbook on paper because they know they're going to mess it up, but they'll put it on their iPad because they know that they can wipe off the screen. So what happens with an ebook is you can load in the same information, but you do not get the ability to define where something is going to be on the page as readily as you do in print, which is all the more reason to get that digital proof back and take a look and see, did that make a difference or didn't it? If what you're doing is a novel, it's not going to make much of a difference. What I've done with mine is, for instance, we flashed that page up before, and we'll see how fast I can get to one again. What I do is I make sure the pictures are small. Now, I can show you an error in that, but I'm not going to get into that digression at this point because we're far enough along. But I make sure it's small enough that even when it's downsized, it's not going to start jumping page to page. The other way to do it is just make sure that whatever picture that is, page break on either side of it.